The sliding glass doors of Providence Ridge Medical Center hadn't even closed behind the fired rookie nurse when the deafening roar of tactical helicopters shook the concrete pavement. Emily Lawson stood in the freezing rain, clutching her severed ID badge, tears of humiliation burning her cheeks. Just 5 minutes ago, she had been stripped of her dream career for breaking a single, unforgiving hospital rule, sneaking a veteran's specialized K-9 into the intensive care unit. The hospital administrator had sneered, calling her a liability. But as heavily armored black SUVs screeched onto the emergency ramp and elite Navy SEALs poured out, armed and demanding answers, the administration was about to learn a terrifying lesson about loyalty. The fluorescent lights of Providence Ridge Medical Center always seemed to hum at a frequency that set a person's teeth on edge. It was 2 a.m. on a relentless Tuesday night, the kind of night where the Seattle rain battered against the reinforced glass windows of the intensive care unit like a million tiny fists. For Emily Lawson, a 23-year-old rookie nurse just 3 months off orientation, the humming and the rain were the only constants in an otherwise chaotic world. Emily had wanted to be a nurse since she was a little girl, inspired by her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who had spent his final days in a sterile, loveless VA ward. She had vowed then to bring humanity back into a healthcare system that often treated patients like broken machines on an assembly line. But the reality of Providence Ridge was vastly different from her nursing school textbooks. It was a corporate machine, driven by metrics, liability clauses, and the iron-fisted rule of the director of nursing, Brianna Carmichael. Brianna was a woman who seemed to lack a pulse of her own. She walked the halls in impeccably tailored scrubs, her clipboard a weapon used to bludgeon the spirits of new hires. For Brianna, a patient was a bed number, a diagnosis, and an insurance payout. Compassion was a liability. Protocol was God. On this particular night, the automatic doors of the emergency department hissed open to reveal a scene that would forever alter the trajectory of Emily's life. Paramedics rushed in a stretcher bearing an older man, his skin a ghastly shade of grey. His chart read, Arthur Hayes, age 68, severe respiratory distress, suspected massive myocardial infarction. But it wasn't just Arthur on the gurney. Trotting frantically beside the paramedics, entirely unbothered by the chaos, was a massive Belgian Malinois wearing a faded, customized tactical vest. The dog's eyes never left Arthur's face. "Get that animal out of here!" Brianna Carmichael's voice cut through the clamor of the trauma bay like a whip. She had materialized from the administrative wing, her face twisted in absolute disgust. "This is a sterile environment. Security!" Arthur, despite gasping for air through an oxygen mask, reached out a trembling, heavily tattooed arm. His fingers, scarred and weathered, weakly grasped the air towards the dog. "No! Titan!" he rasped, his voice barely audible over the screaming monitors. He stays. He's medical. He is a dog, Mr. Hayes, and he is a health code violation," Brianna snapped, waving over 2 burly security guards. "Take the animal to the loading dock and call animal control if you have to. We are trying to save this man's life." Emily, tasked with establishing an IV line in Arthur's right arm, felt her heart twist. She looked down at Arthur's arm. Below the needle insertion site, a faded Navy SEAL trident tattoo was barely visible beneath the bruised skin. This man wasn't just a civilian. He was a Tier 1 operator. A man who had likely given everything for the very freedom that allowed Brianna Carmichael to stand there and dictate the rules. Titan, the Malinois, didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply sat perfectly still as the security guards approached, his intelligent, amber eyes locked onto Arthur's failing body. He let out a single, low whine that broke Emily's heart, a sound of profound, desperate duty. "Ma'am," Emily started, her voice shaking slightly as she looked up at Brianna. "Under the ADA, service animals are—" "Nurse Lawson," Brianna interrupted, her eyes narrowing into icy slits. "You are 3 months out of your clinicals. Do not presume to lecture me on hospital policy." The ADA has exceptions for sterile environments like the ICU and trauma bays. That dog is covered in street dirt. If you want to keep your job, you will focus on pushing that heparin and keep your mouth shut." Emily swallowed hard, nodding quickly as she secured the IV tape. She watched helplessly as the security guards dragged Titan away. The dog dug his claws into the linoleum, resisting not out of aggression, but out of an overwhelming instinct to protect his handler. The heavy double doors swung shut, cutting off the sight of the dog, but not the memory of Arthur's desperate, pleading eyes. Arthur was stabilized in the ER and transferred up to the ICU on the 4th floor. Emily was assigned as his primary nurse for the remainder of the night. The monitors beeped in a steady, albeit fragile, rhythm. His vitals were holding, but the attending cardiologist, Dr. Robert Mitchell, was concerned. His enzymes are elevated, but the EKG isn't showing a classic STEMI, Dr. Mitchell muttered, rubbing his temples as he looked at the chart at the nurse's station. "We need to watch him like a hawk. If he throws a clot, or if there's an underlying bleed we aren't seeing, he'll code before we can even hit the alarm." Emily took this to heart. She sat by Arthur's glass-enclosed room, documenting his vitals every 15 minutes. The rain continued to lash against the window. Inside the room, Arthur tossed and turned in a restless, feverish sleep. His hands kept grasping at the empty space beside his bed, searching for the reassuring weight of his K9 companion. Around 3:30 a.m., Arthur opened his eyes. They were cloudy with pain and medication, but they locked onto Emily with a sudden, startling clarity. "Where is he?" Arthur croaked. Emily walked in, adjusting his blanket. "Mr. Hayes, you need to rest. Your dog is downstairs with security. He's safe, I promise." "You don't understand," Arthur gasped, his hand shooting out to grip Emily's wrist with surprising strength. "Titan, he isn't just a PTSD dog. He's trained for scent, medical scent. He was with me in the sandbox, but now he smells the blood. He knows before the machines do." Emily frowned, gently trying to loosen his grip. "Smells the blood? Mr. Hayes, your blood pressure is stable. The doctors are monitoring everything." "The machines are late," Arthur wheezed, a sheen of cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. "Titan," he alerted in the ambulance. He pressed his nose to my left side. He only does that when something bursts. "You have to get him, please." Emily looked at the monitors. Heart rate, 85. Blood pressure, 110/70. Oxygen, 96%. Perfectly acceptable numbers for a man in his condition. There was no medical indication that anything was wrong. If she went to Brianna, or even Dr. Mitchell, with a story about a dog's nose predicting a medical anomaly, she would be laughed out of the unit. Worse, she would be written up for insubordination. "Mr. Hayes, I can't," Emily whispered, feeling a terrible guilt wash over her. "If I bring that dog up here, I'll be fired on the spot." Brianna Carmichael made it very clear. Arthur's grip slowly loosened, his arm falling back onto the bed. He looked away, staring at the ceiling tiles. "They trained us to never leave a man behind," he whispered softly, more to himself than to Emily. "But in the civilian world, I guess it's every man for himself." Those words struck Emily like a physical blow. She thought of her grandfather, dying alone in a sterile room, calling out for a comfort that never came. She looked at the monitors again, still stable. But as she looked at Arthur, she saw a subtle change. His skin was growing paler, taking on a waxy hue. His breathing was becoming shallower, though the pulse oximeter hadn't registered a drop yet. Emily had a choice. She could follow the rules, protect her hard-earned license, and keep her head down. Or she could trust the word of a veteran and the instincts of a highly trained service animal. She looked down at her badge, the plastic gleaming under the harsh lights. Emily Lawson, RN. "Wait right here, Mr. Hayes," Emily said, her voice suddenly firm. I'm going to get your boy." The journey from the fourth-floor ICU to the ground-floor loading dock felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Emily avoided the main elevators, opting for the service elevator usually reserved for biohazard disposal and dietary carts. Her heart hammered against her ribs, loud enough that she feared it would echo down the empty, sanitized corridors. She found the loading dock security office dimly lit. Dave, an older security guard who usually worked the night shift, was sitting at a desk, eating a stale sandwich and watching a portable TV. Tied to a heavy metal desk leg in the corner was Titan. The Malinois was pacing in tight, restless circles, his eyes wide and anxious. He wasn't barking, but a low, vibrating whine hummed constantly in his throat. When he saw Emily, he froze, his ears perking up, sensing immediately that she had come from his handler. "Hey, Dave," Emily said, trying to keep her voice casual as she stepped into the cold draft of the dock. Dave looked up, surprised. "Emily, what are you doing down here? You're supposed to be in the ICU." "I know, I need the dog," she lied smoothly, though her hands trembled. "Dr. Mitchell wants to try animal-assisted therapy to calm the patient down. His blood pressure is spiking from anxiety." Dave frowned, wiping mustard from his mouth. Carmichael gave strict orders, said this beast is a walking infection risk. "And Carmichael is asleep in her office while Dr. Mitchell is the attending physician." Emily pushed back, summoning a confidence she didn't know she possessed. "Do you want to go up there and tell the cardiologist no?" Dave hesitated, then shrugged, holding up his hands in surrender. "Hey, it's your funeral, kid. But you're taking the service elevator. I didn't see nothing." "Thanks, Dave." Emily untied the thick nylon leash. The moment Titan was free, he didn't bolt. He immediately fell into a perfect, disciplined heel beside Emily's left leg, looking up at her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. This wasn't a pet. This was a soldier. They slipped back into the service elevator. The ride up felt agonizingly slow. Emily stared at the floor indicator, praying Brianna hadn't decided to do one of her infamous 4 a.m. unannounced rounds. Ding! The doors slid open to the fourth floor. The corridor was quiet. Emily peeked around the corner. The nurse's station was empty. Her colleagues were likely in other patients' rooms or the break room. She hurried down the hall, Titan matching her pace silently, his padded paws making barely a whisper on the linoleum. They reached room 412. Emily slid the glass door open. Arthur was unconscious. The monitors still showed somewhat stable numbers, heart rate 90, blood pressure 165ths, but the subtle decline was there. Titan didn't wait for a command. The dog surged forward, ignoring the tangle of IV lines and catheter tubes. He placed his 2 front paws gently on the edge of the bed and leaned over Arthur. Titan sniffed Arthur's face, then aggressively moved his snout down to Arthur's left flank, right near the lower abdomen. Suddenly, Titan's demeanor changed violently. He began to paw frantically at the mattress beside Arthur's waist, letting out a sharp, piercing bark that shattered the quiet of the ICU. "Titan, shh!" Emily panicked, looking towards the door. But the dog wouldn't stop. He barked again, louder, then aggressively shoved his heavy snout directly into Arthur's left side, whining in a high-pitched, desperate frequency. Emily rushed to the side of the bed. She pulled back the hospital gown to look at where Titan was indicating. At first glance, there was nothing. But as she pressed her gloved fingers against Arthur's left flank, she felt it. The abdomen was rigid, board-like. A massive, localized swelling was rapidly forming beneath the skin, feeling hot to the touch. A retroperitoneal hemorrhage. Arthur wasn't having a heart attack. He had a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, or a severe internal bleed that was pooling blood in his back and flank, away from the immediate ultrasound scans they had done in the ER. The monitors hadn't caught it yet because his body was compensating, constricting blood vessels to maintain pressure. But that compensation was about to fail catastrophically. Just as Emily realized the sheer magnitude of the crisis, The monitors above Arthur's bed erupted in a symphony of alarms. His blood pressure plummeted off a cliff. 60/40ths. Heart rate spiked to 140. Oxygen levels crashed. Arthur's body began to convulse, going into hypovolemic shock as his internal blood volume drained into his abdominal cavity. "Code blue, room 412, Emily screamed, slamming her hand against the blue emergency button on the wall. Within seconds, the room was swarming. Dr. Mitchell rushed in, followed by 2 other nurses pushing the crash cart. "What happened?" Dr. Mitchell yelled, grabbing a stethoscope. "Retroperitoneal bleed, left flank," Emily shouted over the alarms, grabbing bags of O-negative blood from the rapid infuser. "He's bleeding out internally. His abdomen is rigid." Dr. Mitchell felt the flank, his eyes widening in horror. "Get him to the OR right now. Call vascular surgery. Tell them we have a ruptured AAA. We need an immediate laparotomy. Move, move, move." Amidst the screaming, the rushing of stretchers, and the tangle of cords, nobody seemed to notice the massive Belgian Malinois standing rigidly in the corner of the room, sitting at attention, watching his handler being rushed toward the surgical elevator. Emily helped push the bed, her hands slick with sweat, adrenaline pumping through her veins like battery acid. They slammed through the double doors of the OR wing, handing Arthur off to the surgical team who were already scrubbing in. Emily leaned against the wall outside the OR, gasping for air. Her scrubs were disheveled, her heart pounding. She looked down and realized Titan had followed them and was sitting perfectly beside her leg. She dropped to her knees, throwing her arms around the dog's thick neck, burying her face in his fur. "You saved him," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "You saved him, buddy." "No." A voice, colder than the Seattle rain outside, echoed down the surgical hallway. "He just cost you your career." Emily froze. She slowly looked up. Standing at the end of the corridor, flanked by 2 security guards, was Brianna Carmichael. Her face was a mask of absolute, unyielding fury. The silence in the corridor was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic beeping escaping from the OR doors behind Emily. Brianna Carmichael marched down the hallway, the click-clack of her designer heels sounding like the ticking of a metronome, counting down the final seconds of Emily's professional life. "I gave you a direct, unequivocal order, Nurse Lawson," Brianna said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet hiss as she stopped 5 feet away. She pointed a manicured finger at Titan, who let out a low, warning rumble from deep within his chest. "I told you that animal was not to be on this floor, and yet I find him not only in the ICU, but outside a sterile operating theater." Emily stood up, her knees trembling, but she forced her chin high. "Ma'am, Mr. Hayes was misdiagnosed. He was bleeding out internally. The monitors didn't catch it. The dog caught it. If I hadn't brought Titan up, Mr. Hayes would have bled to death in his bed within 10 minutes. Brianna's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened into a wall of granite. "Do you think this is an episode of a television drama, Lawson? Do you think medical miracles performed by mutts absolve you of protocol? We have machines that cost millions of dollars. We have liability insurance that costs tens of millions. What we do not have is a policy that allows a farm animal into a sterile unit based on the hunch of a 23-year-old rookie. He is a highly trained service animal," Emily argued, her voice rising in defense of the dog and the veteran. "He is trained to detect the scent of internal hemorrhaging. He saved a man's life tonight. He is a biological hazard," Brianna shouted, finally losing her composed veneer. "He sheds dander, carries outdoor pathogens, and is an unpredictable predator. You have compromised the safety of the entire ICU. You have violated Joint Commission standards, hospital policy, and direct administrative orders." Dr. Mitchell, still wearing his blood-spattered surgical gown, stepped out of the OR for a brief moment to update the chart. He caught the tail end of the argument. "Brianna," Dr. Mitchell intervened, stepping between them. "The nurse is right. The patient had a massive retroperitoneal hemorrhage. It was perfectly camouflaged. We would have lost him. Whatever she did, it worked. Brianna turned her icy glare onto the doctor. Your surgical prowess is noted, Robert, but you do not run the nursing staff, nor do you manage the hospital's legal risk. If that dog bites a patient, or if a post-op patient dies of an infection traced back to canine dander, it is my head on the chopping block, not yours. She turned back to Emily, her eyes dead and cold. Emily Lawson, your employment at Providence Ridge Medical Center is terminated, effective immediately. Emily felt the breath knocked out of her lungs. Fired? You can't be serious. I saved a patient's life. You endangered dozens of others, Brianna retorted smoothly. Hand over your ID badge. Your access to the Pyxis machines and the charting system has already been revoked. Security will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings, and then you will be escorted off the premises. Tears blurred Emily's vision. The crushing weight of her student loans, the memory of the grueling hours studying, the passion she had poured into her patients, all of it wiped away with a single, bureaucratic sentence. She reached up with trembling fingers and unclipped her badge, handing it over to Brianna. Take the dog outside and call animal control, Brianna ordered the 2 security guards. Wait, Emily pleaded, stepping in front of Titan. You can't send him to the pound. He belongs to Mr. Hayes. He's a decorated veteran. When Mr. Hayes wakes up, he will be informed that his pet was removed in accordance with hospital health codes, Brianna interrupted. Move aside, Miss Lawson. One of the security guards stepped forward, a heavy catchpole in his hand, looking warily at the Malinois. Titan bared his teeth, the fur on his spine standing straight up. He was preparing to fight. Just then, an OR nurse cracked the door open. Dr. Mitchell, the patient is crashing again. We need you back in here. But he's conscious for a second, fighting the anesthesia. He's asking for the nurse. Dr. Mitchell grabbed Emily's arm. Get in here. If he goes under stressed, his heart will give out. She is no longer an employee, Brianna barked. I don't care if she's a janitor, Dr. Mitchell roared back, his own temper finally snapping. She is the only one who can calm him down. Get in here, Emily. Emily pushed past Brianna, slipping into the cold, intensely bright operating room. Arthur lay on the table, his abdomen prepped for emergency surgery. He was incredibly weak, fighting the heavy sedatives flowing into his veins. Titan, Arthur wheezed, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He's okay, Arthur, Emily said, rushing to his side, grabbing his cold hand. He's right outside. He did his job. He saved you. Arthur looked at Emily, his eyes focusing on her face. He saw the tears, the lack of her badge, the despair in her eyes. Despite the pain and the drugs, the mind of a Tier 1 operator was still remarkably sharp. He pieced it together instantly. They fired you, Arthur managed to say, his breathing shallow. It doesn't matter, Emily lied, choking back a sob. You just focus on getting through this surgery. Arthur squeezed her hand. It was a weak grip, but filled with a fierce, unwavering intensity. Listen to me, he whispered urgently, pulling her closer. Titan's vest. Left side. Tactical pouch. What? Emily asked, confused. Left side pouch, Arthur repeated, his eyes rolling back slightly as the anesthesia began to finally drag him under. Red button, GPS beacon. Press it. Hold it for 3 seconds. Arthur, I don't... They never leave a brother behind, Arthur breathed out, his eyes closing completely as the machines took over his breathing. Dr. Mitchell ushered Emily away. Go, we've got him. Thank you, Emily. Emily stepped back out into the hallway. The security guards had managed to loop a leash around Titan, pulling him away from the OR doors. The dog was resisting, his claws scraping loudly against the floor. Wait, Emily said to the guards. Let me say goodbye. Just give me 10 seconds. Please. The guards, looking sympathetic, but bound by Brianna's glare from down the hall, paused and loosened the tension on the leash. Emily knelt in front of Titan. The dog whimpered, licking her cheek. She hugged him tight. As she did, she ran her hands over the heavy tactical vest he wore. On the left side, her fingers brushed against a heavy-duty waterproof pouch. She unvelcroed the flap. Inside, her fingers found a hard, square device with a recessed button. "Press it. Hold it for 3 seconds." Emily pressed the button down. 1, 2, 3. A tiny, silent red LED light began to blink rapidly. She zipped the pouch back up and stood, wiping her eyeline. "Be a good boy, Titan," she whispered. "Enough of this melodrama," Brianna snapped. "Escort her out, now." 10 minutes later, Emily Lawson stood on the cold concrete outside the emergency room entrance. The Seattle rain instantly soaked through her thin jacket. She watched the taillights of the animal control van fade into the darkness, taking Titan away to a city pound. Her locker was emptied into a cardboard box resting at her feet. She looked up at the looming, sterile structure of Providence Ridge Medical Center. She had lost everything: her career, her income, her ability to help the patients she loved. And worse, she had failed Arthur, leaving him to wake up alone in a hostile environment without his only true companion. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers numb from the cold, preparing to call an Uber to take her back to a cramped, expensive apartment. But she never made the call, because less than 5 minutes after she had pressed that silent red button in Titan's vest, the distant, rhythmic thumping of heavy rotor blades began to echo through the rain-soaked sky, growing louder and faster and angrier by the second. Rain battered the concrete as the deafening rhythm of rotor blades tore through the Seattle sky. Emily Lawson dropped her cardboard box of belongings, her hands flying to her ears. This wasn't the hospital's standard medevac chopper. This was an MH-60M Black Hawk, painted in a matte, radar-absorbing black, and it was descending with terrifying speed directly toward the Providence Ridge emergency helipad. Simultaneously, the screech of heavy tires drowned out the storm. 3 black armored Chevrolet Suburbans vaulted the curbs of the ambulance bay, completely blocking the emergency exit. The hospital's automated glass doors froze open, sensors overwhelmed by the sudden influx of massive vehicles. Before the Black Hawk had even fully touched down, its side doors slid open. Men descended rapidly, moving with a fluid, terrifying precision that no civilian police force possessed. They wore unmarked tactical gear, night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets, and carried suppressed short-barreled rifles. Emily stood frozen by her spilled box, the wind from the rotors whipping her soaked scrubs. One of the men, taller than the rest with broad shoulders and a face weathered by desert sun and countless deployments, broke away from the formation. He zeroed in on Emily, his piercing blue eyes analyzing her in a fraction of a second. The scrubs, the tears, the empty lanyard where an ID badge should have been. "You're medical personnel," the man stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low rumble that cut effortlessly through the storm. His tactical vest bore a single subdued patch, a gold trident. This was Commander Liam Caldwell. I was, Emily stammered, shivering violently as she looked at the heavily armed men, 10 securing the perimeter of the hospital. "I'm a nurse, or I was, until 10 minutes ago." Caldwell stepped closer, his expression intense. "We picked up an emergency beacon, a Tier 1 medical distress signal from a classified transponder. It belongs to Master Chief Arthur Hayes." "Where is he?" Emily's breath hitched. The red button. Arthur hadn't been delusional. He hadn't just been talking about a regular GPS tracker. He had summoned a DevGru extraction team. "He's in surgery," Emily said rapidly, the adrenaline flooding back into her system. "Room 4, main operating theater. He had a massive retroperitoneal hemorrhage. The monitors didn't catch it, but his dog did. Titan found the bleed just in time." Caldwell's eyes hardened at the mention of the dog. He tapped a comms unit on his shoulder. "Bravo element, push to the surgical wing. Secure the OR. Nobody touches the Master Chief without our clearance. Go!" 2 of the operators immediately bolted through the emergency room doors, ignoring the panicked shouts of the triage nurses. Caldwell turned his attention back to Emily. "Where is the asset? Where is Titan?" Emily felt a fresh wave of tears prick her eyes. The guilt was suffocating. They took him. The director of nursing, Brianna Carmichael. She fired me for bringing Titan into the ICU to save Arthur. She said the dog was a liability, a health code violation. She called animal control. They put him in a van right before you got here. They took him to the city pound. For 3 seconds, the only sound was the idling of the Suburbans and the pouring rain. The look that crossed Commander Caldwell's face was one of absolute, chilling fury. It was a look that had likely made warlords surrender. "Animal control," Caldwell repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He pressed his comms button again. "Gallagher, you copy?" "Send it, boss," came a crackling response from the Suburban closest to them. "Local animal control van left this facility approximately 5 mics ago. They have Master Chief Hayes' K9, Titan. Intercept and recover. Use whatever force is necessary to secure the asset." "Copy that. Hunting now." The Suburban's tires spun on the wet pavement, the massive vehicle launching backward, executing a flawless J-turn before tearing off down the street, its siren blaring to life. Caldwell looked down at Emily, his gaze softening just a fraction. He reached down, effortlessly picking up her soaked cardboard box. "You broke protocol to save a brother. You listened to the dog when the machines failed." "And it cost me my career," Emily whispered, looking at the ground. "Your career isn't over, Nurse Lawson," Caldwell said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "It's just getting started. Come with me. We're going to have a little chat with your director of nursing." The lobby of Providence Ridge Medical Center was in a state of sheer pandemonium. Night shift nurses, orderlies, and confused patients peered around corners as heavily armed Navy SEALs took up strategic positions at the entrances and elevators. Dave, the security guard from the loading dock, stood behind his desk, his hands raised slightly in the air, his eyes wide as saucers. Commander Caldwell strode through the sliding glass doors, Emily walking closely behind him. The water dripped off his tactical gear onto the pristine white tiles, leaving a trail of dark, muddy footprints. It was a blatant desecration of Brianna Carmichael's sterile empire, and Emily couldn't help but feel a tiny spark of vindication. "Who is in charge here?" a shrill voice echoed from the second-floor mezzanine overlooking the lobby. Brianna Carmichael was marching down the grand staircase, her face flushed red with indignation. She was flanked by 2 nervous-looking administrative security officers. She had clearly been awoken by the commotion and was out for blood. "I demand to know the meaning of this intrusion," Brianna shrieked, pointing at Caldwell. "This is a private, civilian medical facility. You have no jurisdiction here. I am calling the Seattle Police Department immediately." Caldwell didn't break his stride until he was standing precisely at the bottom of the staircase, forcing Brianna to stop 3 steps up. He looked at her the way a lion looks at a particularly annoying insect. "Call them," Caldwell challenged smoothly, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the lobby. "In fact, I'll give you the number for the FBI field office as well. They'll want to be here when I have you arrested." Brianna scoffed, though her hands visibly trembled. "Arrested? For what? Enforcing hospital policy? You military meatheads think you can just storm into my hospital. I am Commander Liam Caldwell, United States Navy," he interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, filled with an icy command that commanded the entire room. "And you, Miss Carmichael, have just committed a Class A federal felony under the National Security Act." The color drained from Brianna's face. "What? What are you talking about?" "Master Chief Arthur Hayes is a highly decorated, active-duty Tier 1 operator," Caldwell stated, stepping closer, closing the distance. "He is currently on temporary medical leave. The K9 you so casually discarded, Titan, is not a pet. He is a multi-million-dollar, highly classified military asset, trained in explosives, biological threat detection, and advanced medical trauma alert. He is technically government property." Brianna swallowed hard, taking a small step backward up the stairs. He was a dog. In my ICU. It's a health violation. He is a commissioned officer in the United States military, Caldwell corrected sharply. Titan holds the rank of Chief Petty Officer, which means you, a civilian administrator, just stole government property, forcibly separated a disabled combat veteran from his federally mandated medical equipment, and surrendered a classified military asset to a municipal pound. Emily stood behind Caldwell, her heart pounding. The hard karma Arthur had spoken of was raining down on Brianna with the force of a tidal wave. The smug, untouchable director of nursing, who had ruined Emily's life minutes ago, was now visibly shaking, her empire of rules crumbling under the weight of federal law. "I didn't know," Brianna stammered, looking around desperately for support from her security guards, who had wisely stepped back. "The nurse, Lawson, she snuck the animal in. She broke protocol." "Nurse Lawson saved Master Chief Hayes' life," Dr. Mitchell's voice boomed across the lobby. He emerged from the surgical elevator, his scrubs covered in blood. The entire lobby turned to look at him. Dr. Mitchell walked straight up to Brianna, pointing a blood-stained finger at her. He had a ruptured abdominal aorta. The dog diagnosed it before the machines even registered a drop in pressure. If Emily hadn't brought that dog upstairs, that man would be in the morgue right now. And you, Brianna, would be facing a massive malpractice lawsuit for ignoring a patient's medical history. Brianna opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. For the first time, she looked genuinely terrified. "How is the Master Chief?" Caldwell asked the doctor, his tone shifting instantly to one of deep concern. "He's critical, but stable," Dr. Mitchell replied, letting out a long breath. "We clamped the bleed. He's strong. He'll pull through. But he's agitated in his sleep. His heart rate is spiking. We need to lower his stress levels or his heart will give out." Just then, Caldwell's radio crackled to life. "Boss, this is Gallagher." "Go ahead, Gallagher," Caldwell answered. "Asset secured. The pound jockeys didn't put up a fight when they saw the armaments. We are 2 mics out from your location." Caldwell looked up at Brianna, a cold, victorious smirk playing on his lips. "It seems my team has recovered the asset you stole, Miss Carmichael. Now you are going to reinstate Nurse Lawson immediately. You are going to clear Master Chief Hayes' hospital bill entirely. And you are going to authorize Chief Petty Officer Titan full, unrestricted access to the ICU recovery wing." Brianna's jaw dropped. I can't do that. The Board of Directors will be thrilled to know that I am not calling the Pentagon to report the theft of a classified asset." Caldwell leaned in, his voice a lethal whisper. "Do it, now, or I will have my men shut this hospital down, lock the doors, and declare it a federal crime scene." Brianna looked at the heavily armed SEALs, then at Dr. Mitchell, and finally at Emily. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, so completely, that she had no choice. Defeated, she slowly nodded her head. "Fine," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Fine." 2 minutes later, the roar of the Suburban returned to the ambulance bay. The doors swung open, and Petty Officer Ryan Gallagher walked in. Beside him, unleashed and walking in a perfect, disciplined heel, was Titan. The moment the Malinois entered the lobby, he scanned the room. His eyes locked onto Emily. Bypassing the SEALs, bypassing the terrified hospital staff, Titan trotted directly over to Emily and pressed his heavy, wet snout firmly against her hand, letting out a soft whine of recognition and gratitude. Emily dropped to her knees, burying her face in the dog's neck, the tears she had been fighting finally spilling over. "Good boy," she sobbed. "You're a good boy." Caldwell watched the scene, then turned to Dr. Mitchell. "Doc, let's get this dog up to his handler." "Denenbo." Footsteps echoed heavily down the sterilized corridors of the 4th floor, a stark contrast to the usual hushed tones of the intensive care unit. The procession was unlike anything Providence Ridge Medical Center had ever witnessed. Dr. Robert Mitchell led the way, his surgical scrubs still bearing the grim evidence of the battle fought in the operating room. Right behind him walked Emily Lawson, her uniform damp, but her posture straighter than it had been all night. Flanking them were Commander Liam Caldwell and his elite team of operators, their presence a silent, terrifying promise of absolute security. And in the center of it all walked Titan. The Belgian Malinois did not strain against a leash or bark at the wide-eyed nurses who peeked out from the medication rooms. He moved with a singular, unbreakable focus, his amber eyes fixed on the door at the end of the hall. Room 412. As they approached the glass enclosure, the rhythmic, erratic chiming of the cardiac monitors spilled out into the corridor. Arthur Hayes was alive, but his body was fighting a brutal war. The anesthesia was wearing off, and the sheer trauma of the massive internal hemorrhage and subsequent emergency surgery was sending his nervous system into overdrive. His heart rate hovered dangerously at 135 beats per minute, and his blood pressure spiked and plummeted in terrifying waves. 2 ICU nurses were frantically adjusting IV drips, looking at Dr. Mitchell with panic in their eyes. "He's fighting the vent, doctor," one of the nurses called out over the alarms. "We maxed out the propofol, but his stress response is too high. If his pressure spikes again, he could blow the surgical graft." Commander Caldwell placed a heavy, gloved hand on the sliding glass door and pushed it open. "Clear the room," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for debate. The 2 nurses hesitated, glancing at Dr. Mitchell. The surgeon simply nodded. "Step back. Give them space." Emily walked in, her heart aching at the sight of Arthur. He looked so fragile amidst the tangle of tubes and wires, a warrior brought low by an invisible enemy. But before she could even check his IV lines, Titan made his move. The dog didn't rush or jump recklessly. He approached the side of the hospital bed with incredible precision, acutely aware of the delicate medical equipment. Titan let out a soft, vibrating whine, a sound of profound relief mixed with unwavering duty. Slowly, he placed his 2 front paws on the edge of the mattress, leaning his large, heavy head gently across Arthur's chest, being careful to avoid the surgical site. Titan pressed his cold nose against the side of Arthur's neck, right over his carotid artery, and let out a long, shuddering exhale. What happened next defied every medical textbook Dr. Mitchell had ever read. Within 10 seconds, the frantic, high-pitched screeching of the cardiac monitor began to slow. The erratic spikes on the screen smoothed out into a steady, rhythmic mountain range. Arthur's heart rate dropped from 135 down to 110, then to 95. Then finally, it settled at a calm, resting 82 beats per minute. The severe tension in Arthur's jaw relaxed, and his breathing synchronized perfectly with the mechanical ventilator. The room fell entirely silent, save for the steady, reassuring beep, beep, beep of the stabilized monitor. Dr. Mitchell stood in the doorway, completely stunned. He slowly took off his glasses, wiping a hand across his exhausted face. "I'll be damned," he whispered. "Beta blockers couldn't have done that. Not that fast." Caldwell stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed over his tactical vest, a look of profound respect softening his hardened features. He looked at Emily, who was wiping away a fresh wave of tears. "In the teams we call it the tether," Caldwell said quietly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. A handler and his canine share a nervous system. When Arthur went under, Titan felt it, and when Titan was taken away, Arthur's body knew it was completely unprotected. You didn't just save his life with that surgery, Doc. You needed the dog to keep him alive post-op. Emily stepped forward, gently resting her hand on Titan's back. The dog didn't move his head from Arthur's chest, but he leaned slightly into Emily's touch, acknowledging her as part of the pack. She had protected him. Now, he was protecting his master. Arthur's eyelids fluttered. The heavy sedatives were still keeping him submerged in the dark, but he was clawing his way back to the surface. Slowly, agonizingly, his eyes opened. They were cloudy, unfocused, and filled with the lingering shadow of pain. But then he felt the weight on his chest. He smelled the familiar, comforting scent of wet fur and tactical canvas. Arthur's hand trembled as he raised it from the bedsheet, his fingers weakly burying themselves in the thick fur behind Titan's ears. A single tear escaped the corner of the hardened veteran's eye, tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "Good boy," Arthur rasped, his voice barely audible around the endotracheal tube block. "Good boy, Titan." Arthur slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping past the monitor and locking onto Emily. He saw her standing there, no longer holding a cardboard box in the freezing rain, but standing tall in the ICU where she belonged. He saw Commander Caldwell and the operators guarding the door. "You pressed it," Arthur mouthed silently to Emily, a weak, grateful smile touching his lips. "I told you I wouldn't leave him behind, Mr. Hayes," Emily whispered back, squeezing his hand. Caldwell stepped forward, standing at rigid attention. "Master Chief, the perimeter is secure. The asset is on station. You rest now. We have the watch." Arthur nodded weakly, his eyes closing as he finally surrendered to a peaceful, healing sleep, his fingers still tightly woven into Titan's fur. Outside the room, the night slowly bled into the pale grey light of a Seattle morning. But the storm inside Providence Ridge Medical Center was only just beginning. By 8 a.m., the hospital administration wing was a hive of panicked activity. The sight of heavily armed federal operators patrolling the fourth-floor ICU had caused a total meltdown in the executive offices. Word had traveled at lightning speed up the corporate ladder, and the board of directors had convened an emergency, impromptu meeting in the main conference room. Brianna Carmichael sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her normally immaculate hair slightly disheveled, her face pale but locked in an expression of desperate defiance. She was surrounded by the hospital's legal counsel and the chairman of the board, Richard Davies, a stern man who did not tolerate public relations disasters. "I want them out of my hospital, Richard," Brianna demanded, slamming her palm on the table. "This is a massive liability. We have heavily armed men in an intensive care unit. I fired the nurse who caused this breach of protocol, and I demand that we press trespassing charges against this rogue military unit." Chairman Davies rubbed his temples, a massive migraine building behind his eyes. "Brianna, the Seattle Chief of Police, just called me personally. He informed me that he has been instructed by the Department of Defense to stand down. These men have federal jurisdiction. What exactly did you do last night?" Before Brianna could spin her web of defensive lies, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open with a resounding crack. Commander Caldwell walked in, his tactical gear replaced by a crisp, heavily decorated Navy dress uniform. He did not look like a rogue operator. He looked like the wrath of the United States government personified. Beside him walked Dr. Robert Mitchell, holding a thick medical file, and a man in a sharp suit carrying a leather briefcase, Lieutenant Commander David Bradley, a senior JAG officer. "Good morning, gentlemen," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with icy formality. He didn't even look at Brianna. "Commander," Chairman Davies said, standing up nervously, "we were just discussing how to resolve this misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Chairman Davies," Caldwell replied, taking a seat directly opposite Brianna. Lieutenant Commander Bradley opened his briefcase and slid a thick, ominous-looking folder across the mahogany table. "At 0245 hours this morning," Caldwell began, his eyes locking onto Brianna with lethal intensity, "your director of nursing ordered the forcible removal of a classified, federally protected military K-9 from a decorated combat veteran experiencing a life-threatening medical emergency. Furthermore, she terminated the employment of the only medical professional, Nurse Emily Lawson, who correctly identified the life-threatening hemorrhage, directly contradicting the attending surgeon's assessment." Brianna scoffed, though her voice shook. "The dog was a health code violation. I was protecting the hospital from infection risks and liability." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, throwing Arthur's medical chart onto the table next to the legal folder. "The dog was the only reason we didn't send a corpse to the morgue this morning, Brianna. Arthur Hayes suffered a retroperitoneal rupture. It was asymptomatic on the monitors. The canine detected the internal bleeding 15 minutes before his blood pressure crashed. Emily Lawson risked her career to bring that dog upstairs, and it saved his life. Your protocol almost committed manslaughter." The room fell dead silent. The hospital's legal counsel turned entirely white, furiously scribbling notes on a legal pad. "Lieutenant Commander Bradley," Caldwell said smoothly, gesturing to the JAG officer. "Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, denying a service animal access to a handler is a severe violation," Bradley stated clinically. "However, because Titan is an active duty military asset, holding the rank of Chief Petty Officer, Miss Carmichael's actions also constitute the theft and reckless endangerment of government property. The Department of Defense is prepared to file immediate federal charges, and we are prepared to contact every major news network in the country to explain how Providence Ridge Medical Center treats wounded war heroes." Chairman Davies looked like he was about to have a myocardial infarction himself. He looked at Brianna, his eyes filled with absolute disgust. The karma she had sowed for years was finally coming to reap. "Brianna," Davies said, his voice eerily calm, "you told me the nurse brought a stray animal into the ward to play with a patient." "Richard, I was following the manual," Brianna pleaded, the walls of her empire finally collapsing around her. "The manual doesn't cover federal crimes," Davies snapped, cutting her off entirely. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Brianna Carmichael, you are hereby terminated from your position as Director of Nursing at Providence Ridge Medical Center, effective immediately. The hospital will not provide legal counsel for your federal charges. You are on your own." Brianna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The sheer irony of the situation struck her like a physical blow. Just hours ago, she had coldly stripped Emily of her badge and escorted her out into the rain. "Security!" Davies called out to the hallway. The door opened, and Dave, the night shift security guard from the loading dock, stepped in. He held a small cardboard box in his hands. Dave looked at Brianna, a deep, satisfied smirk crossing his face. "Miss Carmichael," Dave said, holding out the box, "I believe it's time to clean out your desk. I'll be escorting you off the premises." Brianna stood up on trembling legs, stripped of her power, her pride, and her career. She walked out of the conference room in absolute disgrace, escorted by the very guard she had berated just the week before. Caldwell watched her go, then turned his attention back to the chairman. "Now, about Nurse Lawson." "She is fully reinstated, of course," Davies said quickly, desperate to appease the military officials, "with full back pay for the shift, naturally." "Not good enough," Dr. Mitchell interrupted. "Emily Lawson demonstrated clinical instincts, profound empathy, and incredible courage under fire. She has the exact qualities this hospital is desperately lacking. We are opening the new Veteran Care and Rehabilitation Wing next month. I want Emily promoted to head clinical nurse of that department, with a commensurate salary increase." Davies didn't hesitate for a microsecond. "Done. I'll have HR draft the paperwork immediately." 2 weeks later, the sun was finally shining over Seattle. Emily Lawson stood in the lobby of Providence Ridge, wearing a brand new badge that read Head Clinical Nurse, Veteran Affairs. She held a cup of coffee, smiling warmly as the automatic doors slid open. Arthur Hayes walked in, moving slowly but steadily with the help of a cane. He wore a simple civilian jacket, the color returning to his cheeks. Walking in a perfect, proud heel beside him was Titan, wearing his tactical vest, his tail wagging slightly as he recognized the hospital lobby. Emily rushed forward, wrapping her arms carefully around Arthur's shoulders. "You look amazing, Mr. Hayes. How is the incision?" "Healing up fine, Emily," Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thanks to the best nurse in the state, and the best battle buddy a man could ask for." He reached down, affectionately scratching Titan behind the ears. Titan let out a happy bark, nudging Emily's hand with his wet nose. Emily looked down at the dog, then up at the veteran who had changed her life forever. She had lost her job in the freezing rain, but by standing up for what was right, by trusting the bond between a soldier and his dog, she had found her true calling. The corporate machine had tried to break them, but loyalty, courage, and a little bit of hard karma had won the day. If this story of unbreakable loyalty, absolute courage, and satisfying hard karma moved your heart today, please don't let it stop here. We love bringing you these intense, real-life dramatic tales where the underdogs triumph and justice is truly served against all odds. It takes a massive amount of time to craft these emotional journeys for you, and your support means the absolute world to this channel. Hit that like button to honor heroes like Arthur and incredible service dogs like Titan who never leave a partner behind. Share this video with your friends, family, and anyone who loves a powerful story of sweet revenge and redemption. And most importantly, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling storytelling adventure. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more.